What's up, everybody? Christian Pedersen here. I'm going to talk for a little bit. Coach. What's going on, Coach? Talk for a little bit about kind of the information that's been released now about the update of return to action by the CIF San Diego section. Pretty lengthy statement or document, whatever you want to call it, released by them today that, as a lot of you were pointing out, didn't really say an extensive amount other than, we're waiting until the 22nd of July or the 20th. They're going to wait until the 20th of July to make an official decision. So as of right now, nothing is set in terms of coming back. So anybody that you see posting of getting back to action or starting workouts or practices, that is individual district by district information that is allowing teams to do their off-season stuff under the guise of kind of being youth sports, club sports. Decisions that we're talking about, Richard, we're talking about the CIF document that came out today talking about the return to play and sort of the rubric that they have outlined for what they feel is a safe return to play. So basically anybody that you see in the next couple of days talking about, our district has given us the clearance to get back to action, that is that they've got the clearance to get back to doing sort of like the way that a 7-on-7 team exists or that an AAU basketball team exists in sort of, it can be very directly associated with that high school and it can feature a lot of that high school specific athletes, but it is not days that count toward or practices that count toward or anything official. Obviously no pads, because granted most of this is a football conversation, but going to kind of go through, they released this really, like I said, a lot of words to say nothing other than just, hey, wait for a little bit document. But I will say that for everybody out there that is saying that, CIF, like, you're just going to keep us waiting in the dark, or, they didn't, like, why did they have this meeting if they really didn't announce anything? I would counter that and say that they did lay down a lot of foundational work. I spoke with Commissioner Joe Hines, as well as several people within the San Diego section, the CIF Southern section, and the CIF state offices, as well as people who work with Supervisor Kristen Gaspar here in San Diego, who is the one that led to the youth sports getting approved to be back in action here in San Diego. I've also spoken to a couple of medical professionals who have kind of explained to me what they believe are the legitimate threats of organized practices and that kind of stuff. So I will say that from everything that I've gathered on the CIF side, they are not going to make a move forward without the state health officials, the state medical boards saying something specifically along the lines of, yes, high school sports are good to go. CIF, from what I've talked with Joe Hines and everybody, they are unlikely to make any direct forward movement until the state health board says football, water polo, tennis, hockey, whatever it is, you're good to go. You're good to go forward. That being said, they have laid down a lot of the ground rules through this document about how to deal with travel, how to deal with screening your players, how to deal with if things do come back, but they come back on that deadline date. How do we get ready for everybody to have the physicals in time? I'm sorry for struggling to find the word physicals. How can we handle rescheduling games because they are not particularly interested in letting teams have intersection games. So I know that locally already Cathedral Catholic football has taken off the schedule one of their non-league opponents and replaced it with Torrey Pines. I would expect that to happen a bunch at the higher levels, but I would expect there also to be a major issue now with some of the smaller schools out there struggling to find, you know, enough games to fill a schedule. I know that for water polo, a lot of the water polo coaches at the open division and division one level play a ton of games outside the section early on in tournaments. I think last year we didn't see Bishop's water polo play a game against a San Diego section team until about 10 or 15 games into the year. Football, some of the smaller schools like Mountain Empire, Vincent Memorial, Calexico, they play a lot of, I know that like Yuma is against Brawley and El Centro. There's a ton of those schools that I would also expect to have major issues with them even getting 10 games in now this season, alleging that we do start on time. Joe Hines, the incoming CIF commissioner, is very, very confident that we will start either on time, meaning a regular August 1st start date or June 30th, whatever that exact date is, just slipping my mind now because I got a lot of dates in front of me. But he either expects us to start on time or within 2 or 3 weeks of on time for a regular season. But even then, I would expect the travel to be an issue. But in this meeting, CIF started to work on, okay, how are we going to deal with the point rubric for football, water polo, field hockey, whatever it is, if Team X was able to get their full season in, but Team Y wasn't. So it's a lot of that kind of work that the CIF got done in the meeting in the last couple of days. So, we have all the information posted. We have all the links so that you can read. What's up, Kai? How you doing, man? You excited to have football back potentially? Patrick Henry going to score a bunch of touchdowns this year. You can go through and read all of the stuff. I think there's a lot of scary looking words in there when you read about how, locker rooms are not recommended to be utilized for several phases of coming back, and players are expected to dress outdoors. Weight rooms seem almost impossible for some of the schools to meet these regulations, just to how extensively you need to clean them. But I think that looking at those and going, okay, those are enclosed indoors. People would be very tight and packed together, hard to make it happen. You look at that and go, but also we can get football back without having weight rooms. Admittedly, it's probably going to be a little bit weird to get everybody still in shape after all this downtime, but I think you can kind of look at this as there's a lot of optimism, because I don't think football or any of that kind of stuff would be discussed if CIF was really, truly at their core worried about it happening. We got a question on here asking if they think players will have to wear face masks. Yeah, I think that asking people to wear face masks during games is probably a sign that we wouldn't be good to go. Like I said in the beginning, a lot of finding pointers. I'm curious what the no is there, because I've been talking a lot. So you feel free to jump in, because you are infinitely in the know as I am. But I feel like if we are at a point where people still just have to wear face masks, that the state health board won't be giving the green light for this to happen. It would not surprise me though that full face visors, yes, but when we start talking about full face visors and different equipment like that, I think it's very hard for CIF to mandate those kinds of steps, given that school budgets do not have the ability to say, yes, great, let's just spend, $50,000, $100,000 on this, when they're also still trying to get teachers paid, and they're trying to spend the money on getting things sanitized just to have people attending school, because that takes the price. That's the cart. That's step A, is getting people just back on campus. Could liability be a huge factor in all this? I think that's the number one factor in all this, is that CIF is legitimately frightened of being sued into the ground over, and that is maybe an overgeneralization or personification of CIF. But I mean, if you look at Southern section being a little bit of an analogy for the whole state, they got rid of their transfer rules because of being sued over it so many times. The CIF San Diego section, the Olaves most recently, about 5 years ago, caused a huge litigation nightmare over it. What's happening, Herman? So yeah, I think that CIF is legitimately scared of compelling teams to get back into action and then having something follow that. I think that's why they are being safe and waiting for the state health board and the districts to take those steps forward. And then what's happening, Marty? Check your Twitter DMs, or I'll forward my Twitter DM to this Instagram. I want to get you on the show about some other related stuff. But yeah, I think they're legitimately scared about being sued. So hold on, apologize. Do I think that they will open schools? Yes. I am confident that schools will be open in at least some format, which is why I think we are even having this discussion. I think that if the CIF did not feel confident that schools will not be open, that they would have just told everybody we're canceling the fall and we're pushing everything and we're looking at more creative ideas. I think that right now, Joe Hines is very dialed in with the Sweetwater Union District because he's the outgoing, what's up, Buck? He's the outgoing director of athletics in that department, so he's very tied in. Coach Simons, whose mic never works on our show, is in addition to being a coach, he's an elementary school teacher out in the La Mesa Grosse Pointe. State champions indeed, man. If you guys are seeing Buck there comment, we'll share Buck. He's got the greatest intro to any segment that we've ever done in the history of our show. But yeah, I think that the words that I'm getting are CIF would have announced something very negative sounding if they believed anything other than schools were coming open. So, see, the big elephant in the room, we can't have contact sports if classrooms are required to maintain social distancing. Yeah, if you go read through the document that we just recently posted on our timeline, which is just a couple snippets out of the full document, I almost kind of laugh at it because it lays out multiple phases worth of what sports games and practices could potentially look like. And I'll say this, any of you football players that are out there, start getting good at golf, because golf is basically the only one that is go do your thing. You see a lot of words and a lot of phrases on here that are almost comical, no sharing of balls or passing between players during games. And so, yes, I think a lot of it does, to the point that you made there, Fighting Pointers, it does seem sort of oxymoronic that we would be like, from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m, you need to stay 6 feet away from each other. But because we might win a championship this year, go ahead and tackle each other all afternoon after that. I think that football, the other elephant in the room that I am getting the sense of from my contacts within CIF is that statewide, the difference in the sections is going to be an issue because the Southern, excuse me, speaking of football champions, speaking of football statewide, the Southern section, which is everything located north of us that is not Los Angeles City itself, has actual television money tied into their section that no other section does. They have a Fox Sports West deal that pays them very, very well to be on every Friday night. Nobody else really has that statewide. So there is a sort of back burner concern that the TV money tied in with the Southern section is going to push forward wrestling in the winter. It is a little bit more optimistic than football. But if the Southern section pushes forward with football, it is going to put a ton of pressure on the other commissioners because you can't have uneven football season. You can't have it happen in Southern in the fall, but winter and everyone else or anything like that. So if you honestly want to, sort of look where to see the first signs of whether or not football is legitimately coming back, watch the Southern Section accounts. I mean, we'll obviously share that information, but they will potentially be the first domino. I see questions on wrestling and soccer. Really, honestly, everything that we're having a conversation right now is fall sports. I would say winter sports, be optimistic that you will have very, very little of your season taken up. I think that the winter sports have just time on their hands, and in all of this upcoming year, the CIF state is trying to be very flexible. In all of this, the CIF state is trying to be very flexible and say that we will let our state playoffs be some of the pad time. So at the end of every season, there's usually 2 or 3, maybe 4 weeks that that count as the state playoff time. What's up, John? The state has said we will potentially go no state champions. Connor Bell, love the shirt. We'll potentially go no state championships to give the sections time to do their own thing and push everything back. So winter sports like soccer and wrestling, be infinitely more optimistic than fall sports. What about cross country? It is pretty much individual. The formatting that I am hearing run by me for cross country is basically time trials. So not doing mass starts, not doing anything that would potentially have a lot of runners happen to, crowd into an area and do everybody starts 2 minutes apart. Never got into that level of conversation about it, but just got the word time trials thrown at me as a formatting idea. I think that it is one of the sports that offers more flexibility. I think something like water polo is pretty close to football in terms of that sport doesn't exist. Would water polo have a shorter season? I would say absolutely, just out of the fact that the non-league season, we were talking earlier in our video about the travel situation, how CIF is encouraging everybody to stay local, play games as locally as possible, and avoid unnecessary travel. And that will force a lot of teams here in San Diego's water polo scene in the fall to forego early tournaments. I would assume America's Finest City tournament here in San Diego will either be canceled outright or formatted just to be happening San Diego wise. So yes, I would assume, would baseball play? There would have to be something weirdly going wrong. I would assume that we would miss another baseball season. Would football be postponed? CIF San Diego Section Commissioner Joe Hines believes it will be going on at the normal time. It's Taylor. Please go back and watch the beginning, first 5 minutes of this video. I go into in-depth detail about it. Don't want to get Connor. There's a lot of people that agree with you, a lot of people that disagree with you on there. So just be ready for some blowback. Do I believe volleyball will have drastic changes? From my understanding, there is not much modifying you can do to volleyball in terms of its game. It's not something like cross country. I was saying the time trial formatting can change. So I would assume that volleyball, like football, will struggle, if not more than football, because it's an indoor sport, and I would really question whether or not a good amount of the gyms in San Diego have the ventilation or whatever you stop at. I mean, it's just fresh in their mind. Stop asking about spring sports. Fighting Pointers once again brings up a good point that we addressed earlier in the video, that CIF believes they will have a final decision by July 20th. And I thoroughly believe that. I think that even in the last week, information and decisions have started to move at a much faster pace than they did the entire 2 months before this. So I believe that if you look out, July 20th is over a month away. So yes, I believe that by July 20th, we will get some pretty concrete information. I think that the big thing is just going to be that the state health board, and if they see numbers spiking or a no-win impossible scenario to keep student athletes safe. SD Preps, what's good, man? What about wrestling? Again, wrestling is indoors, which is a negative factor for it happening, but it's a positive that it's in the winter. Want to just address a couple more things, unless anybody has any questions that I've been told. CIF is looking to be extremely flexible with grading from the previous season. They're looking at basically trying to more or less waive the grade restrictions, knowing that a lot of the schools unevenly went to pass, no pass, credit, no credit, grading by scale still that they were originally. So I would say that teams are going to get a huge leeway and benefit of the doubt from schools in terms of eligibility. When do you think summer practices are going to be able to start? From what I have been told by Joe Hines, the way that this will work is that July 20th announcement, if we are good to go July 20th, July 21st, things will get up and running because CIF considers CIF considers the dead period and all that kind of stuff that normally happens right around July already satisfied, all done, all taken care of. So there's no more loopholes to jump through. So if July 20th rolls around and they say go, I think we're good to go. Isn't July 20th? Yeah, July 20th is about as close to starting football on time as they would have to be. Overall, I think this is all good news. Joe Hines, the CIF San Diego commissioner, I think is on the little bit optimistic side of the schedule or of all this. I would say that I am slightly pessimistic about it starting on time, but I am optimistic about us having sports. The big things that CIF still is trying to figure out is what happens in the event of an outbreak during the season. If I use Helix football as the analogy for everything, even though champions. Helix football. Let's say that Tyler Buckner tests positive for it, or somebody tests positive for it during the season. Is it that player needs to get quarantined? Is it that team, loses 2 weeks of their season? Does that team have to forfeit their entire season? What about the teams that they had played previously? There's a lot of those issues that CIF is trying right now to lay down the groundwork for, so that they don't have to be reactionary to that. And that, to me, is the one thing that I'm really stuck on trying to figure out how I get around that, because to me that just seems like such a negative. Granted, I don't think we are in a Rudy Gobert situation where if one player tests positive, everyone's going to get scared and the whole thing's going to come crashing down and we're going to have to re-shut down high school sports. But I hesitate on trying to wrap my head around if we go 8 weeks down the football season and then all of a sudden Cathedral, Helix Saints are all out of the running. And our open division champion is somebody from the middle of the pack, and our Division I champion is someone from the bottom of the pack. And then, that hurts the state seed. Or what if we get into the playoffs and that's when that happens? And the first round of the playoffs, a team wins, but then a player tests positive. Do you go back and retroactively take the team that they beat and re-advance them? I think there's just, to me, that is the one detail that I can't really flesh it out about how to. Yeah, exactly. If Fighting Pointers brings up the great point is that there are no resources necessarily for this. COVID tests are, from what I understand, decently expensive, and I don't see the budget for all these school districts to say, great, here's $100,000 that we were going to use just to pay our teachers. Instead, we'll just bank that to make sure that we have enough testing done to make sure our football team can play this season. Because really, when it boils down to it, we at the high school level are not in a situation like we are in the college or pro levels, where these programs are not necessarily making the bankroll that funds the school the way that a USC or an Alabama football program funds the rest of the athletic department. I don't think that the gate sales from La Jolla High School's football program are doing much more than offset the lights that night. So is testing every day or every week? That's an issue. CIF's not going to mandate tests because districts don't have the resources to do it. Districts are going to be at their different speeds at which they all want to handle all this. So yeah, the good news or bad news, I think everything coming out is good news because it means that there's a lot of really invested and intelligent people trying to make this happen and trying to deal with this situation. But the bad news is I think there are just a couple of really big unknowns that ultimately, and I don't want to get into the freedom of rights and able to do stuff and live in quarantine, but ultimately, until we are not in a pandemic type situation where there's an infectious disease that can be easily transmitted globally, I just don't see there being 100% security or guarantee or optimism that everything will happen as is. So go check out all the stuff that we posted, and you can read through all the different what phase 1 of practices look like, what phase 2 of practices look like. But just know that anything that you see being posted on Twitter or Instagram or anything like that about people getting back into action and teams starting workouts is not CIF sanctioned official practices. It's club sports and it's organizations that are loosely associating themselves together in a way that allows them to sort of use the youth sports loophole to jump back into action. So if you see another school going at it, but your school is not going at it, don't think that that's your coach being lazy or being scared or anything like that. That's just the different realities that exist for different districts right now. I have a meeting later this week with Kristen Gaspar and a couple of different coaches to try and wrap our heads around if there are other sort of loopholes that can be used in the existing legislation to help sort of accelerate that process, because I think that it goes a long way to demonstrate that teams and players and coaches know how to do this responsibly. And football teams know how to adapt and work out outside. I know last year when we were doing the grind at Coronado, Coach Hines and his team did not have a functioning weight room because it was being replaced, and they worked out just fine on the field. They did all their lifting, they did all their everything. So I would assume that getting back into action, some teams will be the test guinea pigs and will show off a lot of good positives. So keep the eyes out for there. We will continue to provide all the links and places to which you can go and get more information on all this stuff. As always, you can keep following. Will private schools get a jump in practicing? Yes, no. It kind of goes along that line of jumping through loopholes. I think that the one advantage that private schools might have over anything else is budgetary wise, being able to get resources more directly pumped in and allocated for sanitization, keeping weight rooms sanitary and keeping players provided with masks or shields or whatever it is that needs to happen. And yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if Saints, Cathedral, Bishops, Modern Day Catholic could come up with money to do that before, Morse, Fallbrook, and Olympian. But in terms of actual CIF sanctioned official practices, no, I don't think there will be any. You see one school doing it when another school doesn't. I think that on the July 20th date, when we get an announcement officially from them, if they say we're good to go with official practices, everybody's going to do it more or less based off of their program's willingness to take on that risk. And I don't think that will have anything to do with public versus private. I'm probably taking up a lot of your time and rambling a little bit at this point. So if you guys have any more questions, feel free to DM us or drop us a comment. Mojo SD, I want to get you the link to our latest show that you said you were having some trouble finding. I friend requested you so I can DM you that. Brian Crusoe, hopefully there isn't a competitive advantage for some schools. I'd be curious what you consider a competitive advantage, because I will go on public record saying that I don't think that 7-on-7 has done much, if anything, to give an advantage. So I don't, I get it that it looks great on resumes and whatnot, but I don't think that right now, if you see, the Saints team out there passing around, that it's going to be this huge advantage, because ultimately football comes down to the linemen and the interior, and I just don't think that there's much of that being offered in their ability to get back to doing some summer workouts. I mean, maybe you can get into the minutia of conditioning, and some schools will be in better shape than other schools. But at that point, it kind of feels like I'm splitting super unnecessary hairs, at least this far out from all of this. Granted, historically speaking, according to a lot of you, we're pretty trash in analysis and all that kind of stuff anyway. I was referring to the amount of time they could spend on athletes based on potential resources. Yeah, sure. I mean, you would know because you are at a school that probably would struggle to be a little bit more resourceful. And I think that, if you're talking about the weight room is open and who's able to have cars to drive in and who's able to have more equipment, to me, it still feels like we're ultimately splitting a lot of hairs that are unnecessary at this point, just because we don't know if there's going to even be a season. So somebody could put in a month of work right now, then the July 20th thing rolls around and we're still 3 weeks or 3 months away from anything actually being started. And I'm assuming that it's basically going to boil down to football. If we get it going, everyone's going to be rusty as hell. The scores are going to be awful for the first 2 weeks. Let me go down the line. Volleyball and water polo are the two that I worry the most about for fall, just because they are the most confined in terms of practice and games, and there's just very little flexibility in all of that. I think that golf will take over because golf is all sorts of fun and we will stream it and everybody can get around having at least some sort of sports back in your life. Field hockey, I think, is kind of on that bubble of they'll be the first group, to use a March Madness tournament, they'll be the first 4 in, or the last 4 in, first 4 out kind of thing. But yeah, go check out all the documents that we've reposted from CIF. If you have any other questions, feel free to hit us up. If not, I will say good night. Everybody stay safe. Thank you for tuning in. New show with Bodie, Tommy, Noah, and myself dropping tomorrow. Got a lot of fun stuff that we will talk about then. Everyone have a wonderful night. Thank you very much for tuning in.